think at the end of the day, a lot of leaders don't fully understand their role. Some of them think it is to be the grand strategist for the organization, and that's it. Or they are the face of the company, or they're the ones that hire everybody else, bring in all the smart talent. But what they miss out on so much is they are also the CEO with a little bit of a different description on the C, the E, and the O, and that is the cultural executive officer.
Welcome back. I'm TD Smyers, and this is No Cliches. Hello and welcome to No Cliches, companion podcast to my coaching, consulting, and leadership writing at A Bold Leader. I'm TD Smyers, and I've been in leadership my whole life, from taking point in small teams to command of military troops to multiple roles as a CEO. And if this life in leadership has taught me anything, it's that leading is more art than science. I call this No Cliches because we'll go well beyond the basics here, leaving behind the LinkedIn infographics to dive headfirst into some of the toughest situations a leader can face. Through stories and interviews, you'll get a behind-the-scenes look at leadership truths that always apply, no matter what industry or sector you're in. This is a no-holds-barred leadership conversation, so strap in. When I created No Cliches, I envisioned bringing you inspiring stories from the arena of leadership, as well as some no BS arrows to put into your own leadership quiver. My chat with new friend and colleague Pete Havel includes a bunch of sharp arrows. Pete knows toxic. A former lobbyist for some of the biggest, most powerful organizations in the U.S., Pete's corporate experience was the inspiration for his book, The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures. Pete's now president of Fireproof Leadership, a business that helps organizations fix their workplace culture problems and build better cultures. His speaking, training, and consulting are sought out by organizations ranging from Fortune 500 companies to international police organizations to trade associations to churches. You're going to learn a lot today about what to do if you're caught in a toxic environment as a leader and need a way out. Join me now as I talk to Pete Havel on No Cliches. Pete, welcome to No Cliches. I appreciate you joining me in the studio today.
Honored to be on, TD. How you doing?
I'm doing great. It was a pleasure getting to meet you, getting to know you a little bit online, and then we got to meet up in Dallas, learned a little bit more about your business. Fascinating work, and I'm surprised I caught you not on the road.
It's a pretty busy time right now. What do they call it in the military? Target-rich environment?
No, that's unfortunate, but let's talk about this a little bit. So, Pete, you're, as I mentioned in the introduction, you are the author of The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures. I'm holding your book in my hand right now, and of course, we have links to purchase the book at aboldleader.com, so you can go there after this podcast and pick it up. Man, I got to tell you, this is probably the most enlightening and simultaneously entertaining book I've read in the business space. You've presented it as a work of fiction, and you've written it. So if I were to give you a review, I would say, let me see. So I wrote this down here. Enlightening and entertaining, written with a darkly sarcastic hilarity and a sardonic wit. Something like that. But it's really good, and it's an entertaining read. Again, you present it as a work of fiction, but man, I mean, the situations you describe in terms of a toxic environment, they're so vivid, and you go into such detail. Is it fiction?
It is. I fictionalized it to protect both the guilty and the innocent. To a certain extent, all the events in that, if I'm being truly honest, have a lot of truth to them, a lot of meaning to me, if you get where I'm going with that. But I needed to fictionalize it for a couple of different reasons. Number one, nobody wants to read about some complete strangers going over the cliff. It is, we love a train wreck in some ways and that we want to find out what happened. But at the end of the day, it's a very personal matter as well. So I needed to make it something that people would want to read. And so put a little bit of different spin on it. I enjoy making people laugh. But if I didn't make it something where they felt like they were in it and learning, in a positive way, not a way of, oh my gosh, this just makes me nauseous. Nobody wants to read that. So,
well, I got to tell you, I mean, somebody who has been involved in a toxic workplace situation. And as you and I discussed before, podcast is about leadership and specifically about bold leadership and stepping in when it's really difficult. I've been in that situation as the head of an organization that had a large dose of toxicity in it and toxic players in it. And so seeing that from the inside, when I read your book, it resonated with me in a way that was very, very personal. So you wrote it humorously, and that's good, right? Because that gets people to be interested in hearing your story. It is really a compelling and quick read because of the way you've written it. Man, it resonates. I mean, how prevalent is this? How many people out there have experienced things like you wrote about in the book and things like I just described?
When the question is asked in surveys, you will get numbers anywhere from 25% of people saying that they're in one right now to 60% of people saying that they've been in a toxic workplace at some point in their careers. So I guess the percentage is somewhere in the middle.
When you look at the picture you've painted of coming into an environment unknowingly, you're hired not understanding the toxic coworker that you write about in the book, Hazel. And Hazel, so Hazel, you write about her name and how it's synonymous with the Hurricane Hazel. So that's not really her name, obviously, right?
It is not. No, completely made up.
So how'd you name her Hazel?
You know, you go through those final processes in a book. You've got hundreds of pages down, and one of the things that I wanted to do was kind of road test it. Wanted to put it in front of some smart friends of mine that either were writers, understand a little bit about the workplace, people I trust, you name it. And was sitting down with a friend of mine at Chick-fil-A one day. He was flipping through the book, and he said, Hazel, love that name. Interesting little bit of history. And he went on to explain to me that this piece of history he remembered was growing up on the Atlantic coast, and Hazel being the most destructive, long-lasting from both distance and destructive impact hurricane that they had to a certain point in history. And I thought I had it down there, and I'll tell you the real reason why I had it down there initially was I was looking for names. I didn't want, a very common name where every woman named Julie was coming up to me being like, you had to name your villain after me. Yeah. So it was summertime. My wife and daughter love old sitcoms, and the 1960s show Hazel came on as I was walking through the room one day, and I thought that one's perfect. But then when I learned about the hurricane, it was even more perfect.
Man, it was meant to be. Back to the original question. So you described this environment that you unwittingly got brought into because, well, frankly, the hiring process was not transparent and you didn't know what you were getting into. And then when you walk through your initial interaction at the Chinese lunch with Hazel and oh my gosh, it's like watching a business related horror show open up.
It was.
And then the organization that talks you into this role and that gives you platitudes about this role turns on you. And when things go south, it's surreal, man. But you lived a version of this in reality.
Walk into a job, they like you said, they tell me this much about the role. Then when I get in there, they tell me the whole thing, and that is that I've been hired to work with the untouchable but most dangerous, litigious, most problem-creating, destructive employee that they can imagine, and that, frankly, when I got through with it, that I could imagine. But they had made the decision that there was so much risk to the downside for them in terminating Hazel. They decided, we're going to keep her right in the middle. And hey, Pete, you look like a great candidate to become a bulletproof vest for the rest of us. Welcome aboard.
You talk about this in your book. I'll read a little excerpt from it because I think it's really descriptive. The inability to deal seriously with destructive people and ignore cultural problems is a sickness and a symptom of other illnesses within the leadership ranks. And they've got a kindred spirit, at least partially, in his book, Leadership BS. Jeffrey Pfeffer says, the leadership industry has clearly been better at providing heroes, myths, stories, and inspiration than it has at making workplaces better. Why is it so hard? And what can leaders take from this in terms of dealing with someone who has this level of toxicity that's a serial complainer for no verifiable reason? Why is it so hard to deal with for leaders, and what can be done about it?
I think at the end of the day, a lot of leaders don't fully understand their role. Some of them think it is to be the grand strategist for the organization, and that's it. Or they are the face of the company, or they're the ones that hire everybody else, bring in all the smart talent. But what they miss out on so much is they are also the CEO with a little bit of a different description on the C, the E, and the O, and that is the cultural executive officer. And if they miss out on that part, they're going to be missing out on helping everybody in the organization. It will be partly your fault, either through action or inaction. It's going to end up coming back to you.
Yeah, the action piece, that gets highlighted a lot when a top level leader has bad behavior. So it's obvious when, sins of commission happen. But let's talk about sins of omission and not taking action. Why is there, so is it a lack of courage? Is it a lack of boldness? Is it a lack of decisiveness? What causes these sins of omission when it comes to dealing with toxic players?
It's a lack of courage. It's a lack of boldness. And I would also say it's a lack of understanding of risk. The risk involved when you decide, you know what, I'm going to take a pass on that. I'll let my successor take that on. I'm not going to let that get in the way of my success. It is like looking at a minefield and thinking, all right, I can take enough steps through there. I know the path. And you're just hoping that everybody else following behind you is going to succeed in the same way. That is a really bad assumption. And it takes down a lot of organizations. But a lot of it comes back to this one thing. A lot of us are very, very risk averse. We're uncomfortable having tough conversations. Frankly, I don't enjoy them. But if you don't understand as a leader that is frankly part of your role, it may be the biggest part of your role, depending upon what you've been assigned, what you've been stuck with in your leadership role. You may help take the thing down simply by sitting there and deciding, this isn't me. I'm not gonna go there and having some tough conversations.
I experienced that early on in my career. The difficulty with conflict and with giving people bad news or administering discipline in a workplace, and it's tough. And I learned at an early stage in my development as a leader, though, that even if I didn't like it, because of my role as a leader, I had to embrace it. And
there's nobody else.
Right? It's a great point. If you don't do it, who's going to do it? And to your point, I guess a lot of people don't, and therefore nobody does deal with this kind of thing, and it proliferates and gets into a situation like you describe in your book. Again, the book, The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures. This podcast, as we explained at the beginning, is about leadership. And so a lot of the people listening are leaders. They're heads of organizations or people who aspire to be heads of organizations. So I'd like to discuss a little bit about arrows in their quiver. You mentioned a lack of courage and a lack of boldness causes a lot of this stuff, a lack of an ability or desire to deal with conflict. In terms of intentional personal growth, what can leaders do to prevent themselves from falling into this trap and equip themselves to deal better with toxicity?
If they view themselves as the head of the culture, as an action, it is not a reaction to things. So you want to be intentional. You want to be setting that tone. Feedback. You want to ensure that there is a culture of feedback within your organization. Why? You may have well-intentioned people that are happy to tell you news. They feel compelled to be that good employee that if they see a fire breaking out, they want to pass on the information to someone. But if you've got a culture where folks have a fear base to passing on important things, you've got a problem. And frankly, you've got to address it within your organization. That may mean tough conversations with your leadership, your managers, everybody through the organization, because that thread right there is a symptom of organizations that get themselves into scandals or corruption or things like that because nobody wants to pass on the bad information. They think they may be the victim of retaliation or intimidation or losing their jobs at some point. So that's a big one. But that proactive part, owning your culture and making sure that you're getting the right outputs out of it and understand the risks, huge things that you gotta put on that armor.
Yeah, I love the title you referred to earlier. It's a good perspective setter, the cultural executive officer, and that kind of identifies you as, yep, it's my culture. I have this conversation a lot in my coaching practice. You own the culture as the top level leader. You own it, and what you will tolerate is part of forging that culture. In your book, you discuss the term whistleblower, and you draw a differentiation between whistleblowers and what you call smoke detectors. How would you describe those? What's the difference, and why is that significant?
Yeah, and both of them are not comfortable positions to be in. Whistleblower is traditionally defined as somebody that sees a problem inside their organization and goes out to either the media, the governmental agency, prosecutors, things like that, to say, there's a problem inside my organization, go get them. And people can have all sorts of what they may view as good reasons for it, maybe revenge reasons, can be any combination of things, but that's kind of the way the whistleblower breaks out. What I define as a smoke detector is somebody, going along that fire theme that I got throughout the book, is somebody that sees a fire breaking out in the organization, goes internally to their management or leadership and says, hey, I just want to tell you X, Y, and Z is taking place. I'm afraid of what this may do. As a good employee, I want to alert you to it. The problem is you see on the whistleblower side, you often see retaliation against whistleblowers. But you also see retaliation in lots of organizations against those good employees that never go outside, that say the right things, frankly, very important things to their leadership and management. And you've got folks that are very concerned about, oh my gosh, we've got somebody that is so willing to help our organization that they're going to speak up. That makes us pretty uncomfortable. They view that as a risk area within their organization. That and now I don't think they see it as a positive, but see that as an employee that, wow, this person is a little strong for our taste, and that we don't want to see who else they may tell this news.
Yeah. So the podcast is called No Cliches, so I hate to do this, but I'm going to kind of use a little cliche, right? But trust is so essential in the foundation of a culture. And what you're describing of an organization that's going to retaliate against a loyal teammate who in good faith brings forward something that is a threat to the organization. What kind of practical advice, and this is really cool about your book, it's not just theoretical or ideas or philosophies. You have a lot of really great concrete tools in here for how to shape cultures of trust and openness and transparency to fireproof your organization against this kind of thing. What can leaders put in place practically that'll help them fireproof their organizations?
One of the big ones, and you just touched on it in terms of you're that leader that wants feedback, wants the news, but maybe you've got somebody in your leadership that just went after one of those smoke detectors. You can do a two-step thing that frankly is going to help you in any situation, and that is you train your people, then you hold them to standards. The standards that you set in that training, saying, this is who we are, this is what we're going to do, I expect this out of you. And if you don't see it, you as a leader, if it matters in a big way and you see it blowing up your culture, either now or in the future, you take action. One set of rules, train your people, hold them to standards, and life gets a little simpler and better at that point.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I've experienced that myself. I've had to take action against somebody who was a friend and actually was my next door neighbor. And also because of my responsibilities as a leader. It's tough. And there's a reason why there's sayings like heavy hangs the head on which sits the crown. I want to kind of shift it around a little bit because there's a lot in your book that you talk about in terms of how to fireproof your hiring process. For example, you give an entire chapter to how to fireproof your hiring process. But let's say somebody out there listening to this podcast is in the shoes you were in when you interviewed for the position that inspired this book. What kind of warning signs, what kind of red flags should you be aware of when you're interviewing for a position that's going to maybe reveal the traps that are ahead, the pitfalls that you're about to get into? What are there red flags or things that you can watch for during an interview to prevent yourself from getting in that situation?
There are, and I'm going to take it out one more step and say, in your entire job search process, there are some things. So if that's okay, I'm going to do both, answer both of those. When in that interview process, you're going to want to look for a few things. Number one, understand that interviewing is a two-way street, and you better be interviewing your hiring manager, because your hiring manager is going to have your biggest impact on your job satisfaction. So you better be comfortable with them. You're gonna ask some questions to find out what they're like, what their expectations are, how they lead as a manager, what the reporting relationship is going to be. You're going to want to research them before that interview, finding out where they are. Maybe at some point you're going to be going on to LinkedIn and talking to, and not an investigative, super sleuth kind of way, but talking to former employees of the company, saying, if you had it to do over again, would you work there, and what was your experience in XYZ company or in any particular department? That's one thing I really encourage. You're going to get some real truth out of former employees. You may get some good, may get some bad. Meet in the middle, and you're probably going to find some truth there. The other thing I would encourage is jumping into reviews on Glassdoor. You're going to find a lot of information these days, especially now that we're in what they call the Great Resignation period, where a study was done, I think it was last month, saying that about 11 times more people are leaving because of workplace culture issues than are leaving because of pay or benefits. So you've got a lot of information right there on the internet that you can dig into and make an assessment of, is this a place I want to be? Is this a department that I want to be in? And then, frankly, just never forget about that thing about interviews, that don't look at it as a game of you being the catcher in baseball, receiving that pitch every time, and you're just there to answer questions. No, come in with some questions for yourself, and those are going to be focused on, tell me about this job, tell me how many people have been in this job recently, where have they gone on to, are they staying with the organization? There's a great one to ask about. Are people fleeing or are they growing in the organization? And those are just a few. I have a bunch of them in the book that I could go over, but those are some quick
No,
hits.
those are great, and that's superb advice. And on that line, let me ask you a question about kind of the emperor has no clothes perspective. You spend a chapter in your book defining and helping people recognize a toxic environment, a toxic workplace. What if, as a leader, you're causing, either directly or indirectly, toxicity? You don't realize it. You're not aware that you're the cause of all this stuff, again, directly or indirectly. How hard is it for a leader to notice and be aware of what they're putting into the organization in terms of toxicity?
In some cases, it's going to be hard, where there's not a culture of communication, where feedback isn't encouraged, where a leader is setting a tone of bring me answers, don't bring me problems, where people are frankly afraid of coming to you about anything. But I've seen it in some situations where I'm working with organizations. You've got a leader with very good intentions who may be tripping up on the execution and causing that toxicity you're talking about. I'll give you one example. Worked with several organizations recently that have leaders that really get into the minutia of things. And when they're doing that, they are essentially taking over the jobs of lots of people around them. And specifically, lots of people below them on the food chain. What is that causing? People to become frustrated, people to become, frankly, saying to themselves, well, boss, if you want to do my work, I can go someplace else and find some satisfaction here. But the other thing they're doing is the leaders are clogging up the pipeline on decision-making so much because they're busy doing other things. They're not doing leader things. And when that happens, the gossip starts to hit of people either questioning the leader or just saying, when the heck am I going to hear any answers on what I need to do just to simply do my job? So that's one area right there where a leader is causing the toxicity. What you need at that point is some people, frankly, being able to say and being comfortable to say, I'm hearing some things. I want to help you become the best leader possible, but I want to give you some feedback that we're getting that I think is going to make the organization stronger. Not firing at you, but boss, you need to hear this if I'm going to be a good leader.
It's funny. It's when you say that, it reminds me of some counsel that I provide in my coaching practice. We discuss the difference between transparency and openness. They're two different things, right? Transparency, people can understand your intentions, what you're trying to do, and understand where you're going. And openness, they feel like they can bring their concerns to you and you'll receive them. So it's kind of the two-way street of creating an environment of trust. You demonstrate transparency and you earn openness from people. And so you've just articulated exactly why that's so important in culture. And a lot of people don't understand the difference between those two. You do a great job in your book getting to the root of all the players that are involved in proliferating this problem: the harassers, the tolerators, and in some cases, the false accusers. And you detail how this is really a detriment.
Yeah, and when we're talking about sexual harassment in the workplace, I look at it as one of those things that needs to be dealt with if it's happening. But we know in any situation, whether it is call it financial crimes and anything else we see within the world of scandals and corruption and those types of things, you see a few people who have almost a superpower to be playing chess when everybody else is playing checkers, and look at the weaknesses in the system and say, you know what, I can exploit that for my own advantage. I don't have to be a victim of something. I can create victimhood and then use that in the wrong culture to absolutely blow people up. Where I worked, any accusation was, I would say, taken seriously to the extent that they're going to run it up the flagpole despite knowing a long history of false accusations. They had literally stopped investigating, but would continue on with the process of going after employees as almost a show, as a peace offering to to the other side, if you will, to say this is see, we're good people. Don't hit us again. It was causing massive distrust within the organization because virtually everyone in the organization understood there's false charges being made, dozens of false charges being made, and it starts eating away at the credibility of the leadership. Certainly, they looked at it as double standards within the organization of people thinking, if anybody else was churning up this much trouble and false trouble within the organization, they'd assume they would be gone. But the person who plays the organization's policies like a violin, oh man, it was doing a number on the morale. It was doing a number on the trust levels.
Yeah, and I've experienced that myself personally. I talked to you about that serial complainer who now it was year 5 and I'm on watch, so I get the next complaint and had to make a decision. Do we proliferate this bad behavior or do we put an end to it? And we put an end to it, but it was painful. And there's a cost associated with that kind of stuff. You describe in your book a macro application of this too, when you discuss kind of the limitations of a very well-intentioned and powerful movement, the Me Too movement, which drew attention to women who were experiencing sexual harassment in the workplace and outed a lot of violators and had a lot of good result. But also the concept of believe everybody, believe all women had a dark side, right?
It did, and it frankly was a dark side that I think eventually caught up to them, in that everyone in their lives has met somebody that is untruthful. I mean, there is no perfect person. We know that from the beginning of man, that folks are flawed. They men, women, every day, somebody tells something untrue, and to set up the standard that every accusation must be viewed as a legitimate one. No one bought that, and eventually, when it came to, I think a couple of recent scandals, that came under fire, came under a lot of scrutiny. And even the folks that had been extremely supportive of the Me Too movement said, no, there are some problems with this theory. So I don't view that as an anti-woman in any way. In fact, my book, and I was a little bit nervous when I wrote this book in one way, and that was I came out during the most heated part of the Me Too movement with a character that was a woman who utilized false accusations against various people within the organization. And I was a bit nervous about that, but I've been so encouraged by the fact that I've had lots and lots of those leaders to clean up the workplace who are women, who are feminists, who believed in much of everything that the Me Too movement was saying and has said, and said, you know what, this guy's got a point as well.
Yeah, I mean, agreed. You were honest about it. A third of the professionals that I have mentored have been women. And you point out in your book, the dark side of all this is that there are male executives that just won't mentor women because of the potential danger of being accused of anything. And as you point out, an accusation is enough. It carries enough stigma that you're done, whether you actually did anything wrong or whether you were victimized by a false accuser. How do we encourage male executives to continue to grow and develop and mentor their female, the folks that are going to come behind them and potentially take their role, the succeeders? How do we encourage that kind of mentorship beyond the fear of something like this happening?
Yeah, and I think that's another role of leaders, understanding the room, understanding the importance of women becoming leaders, and saying, look, y'all, we need to have an organization built around trust, built around values. I want to see everybody grow, everybody have the same opportunities here, and let's get beyond the fears, because there is, I mean, you want to manage risk in all sorts of different ways. That's important, organizationally, individually, et cetera, et cetera. And I think there's some common ground. I mean, even that person that makes what I would think would be a decision I wouldn't like, which would be, I'm going to cut off mentoring of anyone of the opposite sex. Well, it doesn't mean that you're walling yourself off 100% from controversy. So are you really doing yourself any good in the first place? Or you may be creating more legal problems by putting in that policy that may not be in writing, but in practice, or if you've told somebody that's going to set you up for failure as well. We're all doing the best we can here, and hopefully getting everybody that we can across the finish line to a great career and a great culture. So at the end of the day, do the right thing as much as you can.
And to put the conversation in context, you deal in your book with the problems of such a one-size-fits-all policy, how it marginalizes people and it opens up new problems and different problems. And we know that proportionally there are the propensity of or the amount of false accusers out there is such that the risk could be very small. It's just that the consequences are so devastating, and that's why people are concerned about it to some degree. But your book deals with it in a very healthy way and a very professional and hopeful way that moves folks forward in terms of adopting those kind of mentorship opportunities, so we can ensure that we have that kind of opportunity happening in the workplace. Some of the folks that are listening, based on my history, are folks that are in the nonprofit or social sector. You've got a bonus chapter in your book dedicated just for nonprofits. Why? Why did you decide that needed to be handled in a different way?
I spent some time in organizations and have had friends, friends both real and imagined, for legal purpose sake, who have found themselves in trouble in dealing with boards of directors and volunteer organizations where you have well-intentioned people who have very, very narrow views of their responsibilities once they come onto a board of directors. And boards have a very important role. They're there to steer the ship, to provide 30,000-foot kind of advice and counsel to staff, to be a check and balance at times with with the paid staff. But if they abdicate those responsibilities, look out. Or if they take way too much responsibility and view themselves as the staffers, the day-to-day decision makers, you're going to drive people out of there that are just going to flee the place. And I've seen a lot of things go wrong inside organizations where that balance is messed up, or you're attracting people that are simply in it for them, because one loud voice can drown out everybody else.
The book is called The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures. Pete, beyond the book, you also have a practice. So you travel, you speak on this, you do workshops. Talk a little bit about what you do and how people can get a hold of you if they need that kind of help.
I started at my company a couple of years ago to frankly just help organizations that, for whatever reason, have a difficulty in solving things from within. A lot of that is often going to be based on trust. Lack of trust. It's going to be based on maybe new leadership coming in that doesn't have the relationships. But it's amazing what somebody from out of town that simply has only the interest of getting things done and making things better can do. So I work with organizations ranging from nonprofits to Fortune 500 companies. I deal with a lot of first responder organizations, which is a real passion of mine. I come from a family that has had some people in the fire service as well as in policing. Man, those are tough environments. They and they have leadership. I should say they have leaders that stay for pretty short stints. And what does that mean? A turnover in culture or a lack of cultural leaders very quickly. So every 2 to 3 years, you may be getting a new fire chief or police chief. And when that happens, you may go from all the way in one direction to all the way in the other. And it causes cultural whiplash or it causes, I don't care what you do, just get the job done. And that has consequences as well in those high profile, high stress, high impact jobs. So working a lot with police and fire around the country.
And so if anybody's interested in tapping into that, it's they can get all the information they need at petehavel.com, right?
Yes, sir.
All right, and we have links to that at aboldleader.com, so you can go there right on the homepage. There'll be a link to this podcast. It'll include links, pictures, and significantly, a link to purchase the book, The Arsonist in the Office, Fireproofing Your Life Against Toxic Coworkers, Bosses, Employees, and Cultures by Pete Havel. And Pete has given listeners of this podcast $2 off by using the promotional code BOLD when you order the book. So again, Pete, one of the most entertaining and simultaneously enlightening business books I have ever read. It's an easy read, but it is chock full of really great counsel and really great concrete tips for dealing with toxicity, for precluding toxicity and preventing yourself from getting sucked into it or even causing it, and how to rise from the ashes in the aftermath of a situation like this, all founded in your personal experience in this topic. So, Pete, I appreciate the fact that you lived what you lived. It makes you a kindred spirit of mine, man. And I love the book that you put it all into as a resource for the many of us, the multitudes of us who have to deal with this stuff in the workplace. So thanks for the book. Thanks for sharing your wisdom, and thanks for being with me today on No Cliches.
Enjoyed it. Thanks so much, my friend.
Thanks for listening in to this episode of No Cliches. For visual stuff like links, texts, and pics, visit aboldleader.com and look for the banner at the top of the page. I'd also like to know what you think. You can leave a voice message at anchor.fm/aboldleader or a written one at aboldleader.com. I'm TD Smyers, and I look forward to having you back.